Hi, my name is Rabbi Dan Judson. This is a YouTube video about the history of synagogues and money, which I'm sure after you guys watch it will go viral very quickly, as people are always scanning YouTube for videos on synagogues and finances. Thank you so much for having me this evening via video. I just want to start by saying that my brother lives in New Jersey, and he's had a hard few weeks between power and gas and everything, and so I wanted to begin just by offering my sense that I'm sure it's been a hard few weeks for you all, and that your interest in talking about synagogues and money amidst all of this reflects no doubt your care and concern for the future of synagogues, which is laudable. Okay, so I'm going to jump into this topic of the history of synagogues and money, and we'll do it very quickly. There's much more to be said, but I was asked just to give kind of a brief but interesting overview. So what I want to begin by saying is a broad arching theme is that synagogues and money, the way that synagogues have historically collected money in America, is not something that came out with the Torah along with the 613 mitzvot. That is, synagogues have collected money in a variety of ways, and not surprisingly, there's been historical evolution and change in America, and it has not always been that since Sinai that synagogues collected dues and had high holiday appeals. They've done other things, and so that's what we're going to talk about very quickly. Is kind of what are the other things that they did, and go from there. So I want to begin in the kind of from the colonial era, and board members of synagogues, when I say this, are usually yearning to go back to the colonial era, but in the colonial era until about the mid-19th century. One of the three ways that synagogues primarily raised money was by being able to fine their congregants who were unruly in one form or another. So that unruliness might have been if they interrupted services, if they talked too loud at board meetings, if they refused to serve on the board itself. If they were given that honor and they refused, they would have to pay their way out of it, basically. So one significant way that synagogues raised money was fines, and fining, interestingly, comes to an end when synagogues begin to compete with each other. It kind of makes sense that in about the about 1820s and 30s and 40s, synagogues begin to compete two in the same, sometimes three in the same city. The first competition happened in New York City in 1825 when B'nai Jeshurun sprung up to challenge Congregation Shareth Israel. And once you have more than one synagogue in town or city, your ability to find people kind of goes away, because they obviously would take, if they get a note in the post that they owe $5 because of their disreputable behavior and speaking too loudly at Shabbos services, they simply walk down the street to the other shul rather than pay it. So fining was, I'm sorry to say that I don't think fining is going to make a comeback for those of you who are sitting on boards now. It seems unlikely you're going to use that to make up for synagogue deficits. The other two significant ways that synagogues raised money into the 19th century, one was paying for Torah honors. This is a practice that goes back to about the Middle Ages in Judaism, and goes out of favor in America also in the 19th century in most, but not all, synagogues. There are some synagogues to this day, there's some Sephardic synagogues in particular, that still have this practice of auctioning off or paying for Torah honors when they happen. And it's a very interesting custom. Middle services were either in Spanish or Portuguese, because that was because that's where the custom, one of the places where that custom really took hold. Would have somebody would use one of those languages to conduct an auction, and people would vie for the bidding on honors, or even if it wasn't an auction, then there was a set price, and each time you had the first allele would cost this much, the second allele would cost this much, so on and so forth. This, interestingly, goes out of fashion in most places. I'm going to argue primarily because paying for Torah honors in the middle of services makes Jews in an American setting uncomfortable, because it kind of reinforces their own fear that people are going to look at them as kind of money obsessed. And I'm not going to go. I actually have proof. We have proof of that statement, and I have some documents which Jews make that basically explicit, that they're fearful that Christians are going to consider them money obsessed and kind of reinforce notions of Shylock, which Jews are desperate to avoid in an American context. The third way that synagogues raise money, and probably the most significant way, is that they would sell seats. Sometimes rent seats for the year, sometimes sell seats in perpetuity, and then people would pay an assessment on those seats. And this worked exactly like a Jets game works, or I'm sorry, speaking to New Jersey, exactly like a Giants game would work, or the former New Jersey Nets would work. You would pay more money for a 50-yard line seat than you would for an upper deck corner of the end zone seat, and that you would have that seat. And I think the Giants work exactly in this way. You'd have that seat, and you would pay for the seat, and then you pay a yearly assessment on the seat. This was the way that Christians raised money in Protestant churches in the 19th century, and was the way that Jews raised money in the 19th century. At a certain moment in history, not one moment, but kind of over a few decades, Christians move away from this model and start passing the plate, which is what we're familiar with when we think about Christians. But Jews continue this model really into the end of the 19th century, and and it is ultimately replaced with dues, which is the model that we're familiar with. But in the 19th century, it's very interesting. What happens is synagogues become, the idea that you pay to sit closer begins to rub people the wrong way in a kind of democratic, egalitarian, at least a kind of idealized egalitarian version of what community is. The idea that if you paid, I'm just making up numbers, $100 to sit on the front row because you were wealthy, and you're just kind of sitting closer to the Torah, and somebody can only afford to pay $10 for the back row, begins to feel un-American. And it's interesting the way, and we need to keep in mind the way that synagogue finances both reflect kind of American ideals and also kind of what's going on in the Christian world. Christians have moved away from paying for seats, in part because of the same pressure of feeling un-American, to pay closer, to pay more to sit closer. And so whatever the next step is, whereas you're thinking about synagogue finances, you absolutely have to be thinking about what's going on in church finances, what's going on in kind of the general zeitgeist that will allow synagogues to move forward. I would say the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue was founded by Stephen Wise in 1905, really, and one of its ideas was it was going to be free from dues, but it was also going to be free from paying for seats. He imagined he was going to raise money from his wealthy congregants to sort of support the synagogue, support his salary and support the synagogue. And makes explicit this sense that if you paid for seats, there was something un-egalitarian about that and not in keeping with the American spirit. And modeled the Free Synagogue movement exactly after something called the Free Church movement. So it's just interesting. Stephen Wise Synagogue, by the way, at last count, it was a synagogue begun in 1905, supposed to be free from dues, but now it costs $3,000 per family last time I checked. The dues system was, too powerful. So dues come into being, and high holiday appeals come into being in the early part of the 20th century as the primary mode by which the synagogues are going to raise money. The high holiday appeals, the same rationale that existed then exists now. That is simply when Jews showed up. We have lots of data from the early part of the 20th century that, on any given Shabbat, maybe 20% of the Jewish community in New York City was sure going. But on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, those numbers were astronomical. And you had 80, something like that, maybe a little. We don't have hard statistics on exactly how many would show up on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, but we presume 85% of the Jewish populace would come. So that's when the Jews showed up. So that's when they were asked to contribute. Dues, which is the model that you're mostly familiar with, comes into being in the early part of the 20th century as a solution to this unegalitarian problem. That is, if we hold a set fee and there are no seats associated with it, then people will simply have the ability to pay once a year. They'll have their synagogue membership, and they'll be satisfied. The model, of course, is a kind of country club model. There's only so many ways I think nonprofits of this sort can raise money for the synagogues, can raise money for themselves. Churches chose a kind of NPR or public radio model, which is we're going to consistently very much hit up our donors, and synagogues went to this country club model. And so this is where we are now, and I think we're at a moment, of course, where this model is being challenged as, is this the most effective model? Can this model even withstand the pressures of the economy and a sense that the quote-unquote country club model is not in keeping with kind of where we are in terms of what the Jewish community looks like in democratic America in 2012. I will stop there. Thank you.